In today's video, I want to show you how I've restored this mid-century teak sideboard and added a pop of color to it using linoleum. Now, unlike vinyl, which many people confuse it with, linoleum is made from almost all natural materials, which gives it this lovely warmth and texture, and it just feels really good to touch. It is also very easy to work with. We bought the sideboard off of eBay about, I'd say, 2 years ago. I did some testing on it with my soda blaster rather than sanding it, and then it ended up standing in my workshop for about 9 months before I made time to finish it. I started off by removing the doors one by one and sanding each of those, starting with a 80 grit and working my way up to a 240 grit. To make it easier, I made sure to remove the handles and sanded them separately to a good finish all around. The reason I do it door by door is that I prefer to have my projects broken into small, kind of manageable pieces, especially as I'm working on it only in the evenings and over weekends. Personally, I find doing it this way just keeps me motivated because I can see progress over like short bits of work, and that has always worked for me. After I finished the doors, I then moved on to the cabinet itself. I decided to only sand the outside as the insides of the cupboard were all in good condition, and it just seemed a little bit pointless to spend much time sanding it on the insides. Sanding is a funny one because although it's not hard and it does make a big difference to your piece once it's done, it is still bloody tedious, and it's just something that you need to get on with. So what I do, I put on some music or a podcast to listen to and then just do it. The broad principles are to gradually work your way up through the different grits from, I start with 80 up all the way to 240 if you're doing furniture, and sand mostly with the grain and keep the sander moving so that you don't sand through the veneer. As I sanded the top down, I started to consider maybe just keeping the original veneer. Now, teak is such a beautiful wood, and somehow covering it with something else, doesn't matter how nice it is, would have felt wrong. So I decided to sand the top down, look at the condition of the veneer, and then make a decision between repairing it or just layering it with linoleum. But as you can see here, I did sand through the veneer in a couple of places, which does sometimes happen, and that just tipped me towards the linoleum top. Now that I had the whole cabinet sanded down, it made the shelves look a little bit tired, so I decided to replace them with new ones. To do this, I marked them out on a piece of plywood I had in the shop, using a jigsaw to cut them to size, leaving them just a little bit larger than the line. Then I screwed the original shelves to the new plywood ones before routering it to the exact size with my router and a template cutter. With the shelves now done, I moved on to the edges of the top. The filling you see me doing here isn't cosmetic, but I needed a sharp corner for my replacement veneer to fit onto. You'll see what I mean later in the video. So while I was waiting for the filler to dry, I just did a little bit more work on the flip down lid. It had a layer of this white Formica, which I just gave a quick sand to, so it gives it a key for the adhesive to stick to later on. And a single sanding with 100 grit is fine, as all you really need to do is to get rid of that shiny layer. The doors were now finished and ready for their first layer of oil. As with most of my projects, I use a matte oil by Osmo as it retains the natural look of the wood, and I just prefer it over that high gloss finish that was popular at the time that this furniture came out. Each piece of furniture you build or renovate almost always has a favorite component, and on this piece it are these handles. I like everything about them, their shape, the wood it's made from. To see them transform through such a simple process as just rubbing it with a little bit of oil is one of the biggest pleasures I get from doing woodwork. The next step was to finish the edges of all the shelves. You can buy real wood edge veneer with pre-glued backs online, and as you can see here, applying it with a heat gun and a small wooden roller is very easy to do. The important thing is just to keep the heat gun moving so you don't burn the face of the veneer, but otherwise it is really straightforward to apply. I normally have a couple of passes to make sure it is stuck in position, and then I reheat it bit by bit and roll it firmly with the roller for a couple of seconds whilst it cools and binds permanently to the wood underneath. You do get special edge trimmers to get rid of the excess, but unless you are going to do a lot of it, a sharp chisel works just as well. The lightest of sands with a 240 grit sandpaper on a block to keep it square is all it takes to finish the edge off completely. You remember those edges that I filled and I mentioned I wanted a sharp corner? This is what I meant. The sharper the edge I make here, the easier it would be to finish the veneer that will be glued onto it, so it's worth spending a little bit of time on. This veneer edging saves you such a lot of time and is a great way to fix the edges of damaged furniture. It comes on rolls you buy by the meter, so you only buy as much as you need, which makes it really cost effective, even though it's a high quality product. Here in the UK, I bought it from a family business called Veneer after finding their shop on Amazon and reading a couple of reviews before ordering. I'll stick a link in the description below if you wanted to check them out. So again, you want a notification each time I release a new video, then click the bell button below. Easy. As with the shelves, it is just a matter of heating the glue bit by bit and applying firm pressure with the roller until the veneer adheres properly to the edge. Here I'm just covering the side of the sideboard with a piece of scrap wood, as the last thing I wanted was to let the original veneer peel off because of the heat. Veneer now applied, I can go around the edges with a chisel to cut it flush to the edges. You'll note here that I take care to cut from the face of the veneer towards the back. This is just to prevent breaking out a piece of the veneer because it is quite brittle when not supported. For the long edges, you simply run a sharp chisel along the sides. Applying the veneer is actually very forgiving. If you find a bit that didn't stick 100% when applying it the first time, you simply just reheat it and apply pressure again and it will work. The existing veneer on the rest of the piece is in really good condition, except for this corner here where it picked up a little bit of damage, so I decided to repair it. The reason that I'm cutting and cleaning the old veneer at an angle, as you can see here, it is just that it makes it less noticeable than you would have with a square joint. To get the exact angle of the veneer, I used a piece of paper and a pencil to trace the shape before transferring it to a small piece of veneer. You then repeat the same process of heating it, rolling it on, cutting it back, and shaping the edges. On the back there was a small tear out of the veneer as well, which I fixed in the same way. I think what makes this particular task so enjoyable is that you make a big difference to the piece by actually adding very little to it. What I did better with this second fix was to match the grain more accurately to the original veneer, and you'll see what I mean shortly. I also took a bit more time tracing the relief of the damaged area onto a piece of paper and cutting it with a chisel, as it had two joining edges rather than just the one. And when you apply the oil, the damage almost completely disappears. The grain match on the corner isn't as close as the one on the side, but with a bit of filler and oil is still a big improvement on the original. Applying the long pieces of veneer to the front of the piece is exactly the same as for the smaller pieces, but because I was applying it to a curved edge, I just made sure I'm applying it from one end, and this was just to prevent suspending it between the two, let's call it hills, and thus ending up having to redo it again. The linoleum I used is made especially for furniture and is made by a Swiss company called Forbo. You can pick from loads of different colors, and for this project I picked their kind of turquoisey aquavert, as it just felt clean and crisp. As standard, it comes in 1.8 meters wide and you buy it by the meter, so although it is not the cheapest of materials, similar to the edging, you only need to buy the amount that you need, which makes it cost effective. To cut it, I first put down an old blanket to work on, and this is just so you don't scratch the face when moving it around whilst cutting it. I find weighing the ends down with something heavy just makes it more comfortable to work with the linoleum, and as I'll be using contact adhesive, which really only allows you to have one go at applying it, I cut it at least 2 centimeters larger than I needed, just to give me some wiggle room when applying it. I have this large T-square, which is very handy, but it's not necessary to buy one if you're only going to do this once. Any straight edge will work just fine. I find making multiple light cuts with a sharp utility knife from the back of the linoleum the best way to cut it. It can then simply be snapped on the cut line without tearing the material. For smaller parts, it's just a matter of figuring out a configuration to waste the least amount of material and then cutting all the pieces to size. Then comes the gluing. After making sure that both surfaces are free of dust, I applied the adhesive to both the wood and the linoleum before letting it dry for 10 minutes. Now, you don't strictly need to apply constant pressure over an extended period when working with contact adhesive, but given that pieces are small and I wanted to test the method anyway, I decided to use vacuum luggage bags to apply pressure evenly. After it dried, I simply cut off the excess before routering and sanding the edges to their final finish. Gluing the top of the cabinet was a little more daunting just because it would have been awkward to handle such a large piece of linoleum, especially after being covered with glue. The way I got around this was to use these small spring clamps to lock it into position first and then doing one half at a time. To get a clear line of where the half stops and the next half begins, I just used a piece of wax paper underneath. Like with the smaller pieces, you apply the glue to both surfaces and wait 10 minutes before pushing them together. Obviously, I couldn't fit the whole cabinet into a vacuum bag, and therefore I just used a rolling pin to apply pressure to each bit of the linoleum. There is no real technique to this, just as long as you roll over it multiple times with firm pressure, you'll be alright. I then repeated it on the second half, but ran out of the adhesive I've been using. Luckily I had some spray contact adhesive that works just as well, but is more messy, so if you do use this, make sure you cover any surrounding areas you want to protect. Because it has a curved edge, I had to take a bit more care when cutting off the excess, but it isn't a big problem. It just takes a bit of time. And for some reason the router didn't leave the cleanest edge, so I decided to go around it with a chisel and just remove the excess in this way until I was happy with it. When applying the oil to the edges, I was just mindful to consistently apply it also to the black backing paper, just to prevent it looking patchy. The last thing to do was to just reattach the handles and fit the doors back onto the cabinet. And seeing a piece of furniture you put such a lot of work and effort into go back together always feels rewarding. I learn something from each piece that I work on, and the thought of myself and others enjoying it for many years to come makes me, well, happy.